Chapter 6. We stood around staring at each other. Holly took a seat and patted the one next to it. Haley, sit here. The boys took the other seats. Boys against girls is unfair, Holly whispered to me. There's more of them. I've been saying this since school started, and plus, are we going to get tested on this? I smiled. Everything was unfair to Holly. We were both only children, but sometimes I thought maybe she had a bunch of brothers and sisters hidden away because she always felt like someone was trying to cheat her out of something. It's free time, I whispered back. You heard Miss Laverne, there's not going to be a test. Ashton, Tiago, and Amari had pulled their seats farther back, making the circle bigger and lopsided. Esteban's was next to mine. He sat down heavily, put his his head on the arm of the desk, and closed his eyes. His lips were chapped, and he had tiny freckles over his nose that I hadn't noticed before. I think that first day in the art room, we were all sure his dad would be back soon. Tomorrow, the next day, the next week. None of us really knew about forevers yet. We were still just learning how things could change in a minute, how you could be in the middle of putting plates on the table when the phone rings with bad news, or how your mother could come in and kiss you goodnight, and when you ask, is Poppy home yet? Your mother says, no, but maybe he's working late. And then you wake up in the morning and run into the kitchen, and your father's empty dinner plate is still on the table. I thought about one of the stories my uncle liked to tell me. Before I went to sleep, he'd kiss my forehead and say, don't forget the happy ending. The story went like this. 2 kids got lost in the forest. First, they came to a snake and asked him the way to go. The snake said, freedom is through my lair. The kids knew they'd get eaten if they followed the snake. They came to a spider, and the spider said, freedom is in the center of my web. They knew they'd get eaten there too. They came to a wolf, a grizzly, more snakes, and on it went. By the time they came to a wild boar, they were tired and hungry and scared. So when the wild boar said, freedom is inside that thicket of branches where I sleep, they followed him. They had given up and figured it would be fast and maybe not as painful to get eaten by a wild boar. But instead, the wild boar fed them apples and honey. When their bellies were full and their eyes grew heavy, the wild boar covered them with blankets made of leaves stitched together with vines and watched over them while they slept. When morning came, they climbed on his back and he led them safely home. When I asked my uncle what the moral of the story was, he said, no moral, just a happy ending. Amari got up again and pulled his desk close to Esteban's. Your pop will come home, brah, he said. I got a feeling. But then we still all believed in happy endings. None of us knew yet how many endings and beginnings one story could have. Chapter 7. One Saturday morning every other month, my uncle drove the 2 of us the 7 hours to Malone, where my dad was in prison. On the first Saturday in October, my father refused to come down to the visiting room. My uncle and I waited. Time passed, and my uncle paced and asked the guards what was happening. Finally, after I don't know how long, we got in the car and drove the 7 hours back to Brooklyn. On the ride home, I thought about how even our brains have room, and we could just put stuff in those rooms we don't want to think about or remember. I decided I was going to put us sitting in that overheated waiting area into a room and lock the door. But that night, when my uncle came in to tell me a story and kiss me goodnight, he said, your dad's afraid. He hasn't been on the outside in 8 years. That's a long time. But it's not our fault, I said. The rule is every other month he sees us, and if he won't see us, how are we going to help him get ready for the outside, for coming home? My uncle sat on the edge of my bed. I was staring at the wall and wouldn't turn towards him. The anger inside me was fire. It was flames and ash, too. Look at me, my uncle said. I shook my head. How could my father just sit in his cell? How could he choose sitting in a tiny cell over being in a room with us? With his brother, his daughter, his family, the only family he had left. Haley, I'm serious, my uncle said. Look at me. I turned towards him and pulled the covers up over my face. Haley, what? I snatched the covers below my chin and glared at him. What do you want? My uncle's voice stayed calm. He pressed his pointer finger between my eyebrows. I want you to know that we're all flawed, he said. We all have those days we just don't want to show up. Days we just want to forget the world. Doesn't make us bad people, just makes us people. And time moves as it moves. In a month, this moment won't be anything. But he didn't even want to see us after we drove all the way up there. That's not right. My uncle didn't say anything. My dad was his big brother. He always said that my dad had been his hero when they were kids, that he used to follow my dad everywhere. He can't just choose to disappear. He can't just act like that, like he doesn't love me, like I'm not his daughter. He should be running to see me. He does love you, Hales. The night you were born was the first time since we were kids that I saw my big brother cry. When I got to the hospital, you were asleep in your mom's arms. He had on one of those tiny blue and pink caps they put on newborns. Look at this, your dad whispered. And he gently pulled the cap back to show me your bright red hair. You didn't have a whole lot then, and the room was nearly dark, but it glowed. I swear your hair glowed. No, it didn't. I was trying to stay mad, but I couldn't help smiling. I swear, my uncle said, you had glow-in-the-dark hair. Lies. Anyway, your dad pulled the cap back over your head while you and your mom kept on sleeping. Then he took my hand and pulled me out of the room. I leaned my head against my uncle's chest. I could hear his heart. It was beating fast. He said, she's so tiny, Steve. She's so perfect. Then he put his hand over his face and started sobbing. Those two people in there, they're everything to me. Everything. How am I ever gonna... My uncle stopped talking and sniffed. He reached his hand up to his face. I kept my ear pressed to his chest, my eyes closed. I knew he was crying and wanted to let him do it without getting embarrassed. To be the best dad and husband, he asked me how he was going to be the best, and I told him he didn't have to be the best, that nobody could be the best. I could feel his chin nodding into my scalp. How many times had he told me this story? Still, I could listen to it for infinity. I told him to just be there, my uncle said, for everything, every first word and step and first love. Yuck, I said. One day you'll fall in love. Ixnay on the love, Uncle. Back to the story, please. You know the story. Still, I said, I want to keep knowing it. My uncle's heart had slowed back down. Outside, a car drove past with its music turned up loud, the noise fading as it moved farther away. Do you remember anything about her? Just that picture, I said. The one where it's the back of her and I can see her hand and her nails. My uncle was quiet for a long time. There had been a flood that ruined 2 computers worth of pictures and a bunch of framed ones. And years later, just before the accident, there had been a small electrical fire that took out the bookshelves where all the photo albums in my uncle's record collection had been. The picture of my mom and dad had been in my father's wallet when he was arrested. The rest, that was up to memory. She was so beautiful. My uncle pressed his lips into the top of my head. Then he pulled back, away, and looked at me. You look more like her every day, you know that? I nodded. Yep. You keep saying so, but I look like you and my father, too. I look like everybody. You look like you the most, though, Hales. I yawned as he brushed my hair away from my face with his hand. Hey, I said, can you buy me a voice recorder? I need it for a project at school. How come you don't just use your phone? He asked. Not allowed to. Yeah, sure, I can do that. You okay? I nodded. Yeah, just tired now. He kissed my forehead and turned out the light. Good night, Haley. I love you to the moon. I yawned again, pulled the covers over my head, and said, I love you until Pluto becomes a planet again. Chapter 8. The following Monday, right after dinner, my uncle put a recorder on the table. It was small enough to hold in my hand. It's charged for now, he said, but I can show you how to do it. He looked at me. By the way, what kind of school project is this? I don't really know what it is yet. It's like your stories. How so? I just want to record stuff, I told him, and then I want to see what it becomes. I want to be able to listen to it later and figure out what it is, I guess. I turned the recorder around and around in my hand. Thanks for getting this. Can I be excused? Well, since it's your night for dishes. My uncle nodded, then frowned at me. You okay? Yeah, I'm good. I ran up the stairs to my room. The comforter on my bed had a purple unicorn on it. Once I thought I was going to die if my uncle didn't buy it for me, and now climbing into it suddenly seemed silly and childish to me. How had what I liked changed that fast? I clicked the recorder on and held it in my lap. I recorded the sound of my own voice. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3, then played it back. My voice sounded babyish and high. I got up, brushed my teeth, and put on pajamas. Then I climbed into bed and turned the recorder on again. My name is Haley Shondell McGrath. I'm 11 years old. My father is in prison. My mother is dead. But don't feel sorry for me. I don't remember her. My uncle says I have her eyes. McGrath is an Irish name. It means son of grace. But this McGrath right here is somebody's daughter. Miss Laverne has put the 6 of us in the art room. We're going to go there every Friday for an hour to talk. Me, Amari, Ashton, Esteban, Holly, and Tiago. Our story starts in Miss Laverne's class in the borough of Brooklyn in the city of New York, but it's a story on top of a story. It's a story that started and ended a whole bunch of times. When we were studying the history of New York, we talked about the Lenape people. They were the real native New Yorkers, but it wasn't really called New York then. Their name for it was the Lenapehoking, but then the Dutch settlers killed them and took their land. That means wherever we put a single foot. It's land that belonged to the Lenape. It's land they might be buried under. It's land that they died for. Miss Laverne said that we should always remember this, that even though we have our dreams, the Lenape had dreams too, that even we're here now, they were here first. I think this is what the world is. Stories on top of stories, all the way back to the beginning of time. Miss Laverne asked us if we were living in Lenapehoking, which would we fight alongside the Lenape, or would we try to take the land for ourselves? We all said we'd fight with them. We all said we'd try to help them onto their land. I turned the recorder off. When we told Miss Laverne we'd fight with the Lenape, she said, but then maybe you wouldn't be here now in America. When she asked what question, none of us said anything for a while. We all just looked around at each other. It wouldn't be America, but it would look like us, Holly finally said. It would look like this classroom, I think, because we could figure out how not to just take something, and the Lenape people would probably share with us too. And then we'd all mix together, Tiago said. Before Miss Laverne talked about the Lenape, I hadn't really thought about the people who came here before we did. Indians were just Indians with big crowns of feathers, hopping around in circles and hitting their hands to their mouth. But after we learned about the Lenape people, I couldn't do that hand thing anymore. I couldn't see the people wearing their feathers at football games on TV and on Halloween and not think, that's not right. That's not the truth. When I told Miss Laverne that, she smiled and said, exactly. Then she smiled even bigger and said, I love this class so much, which made us all feel amazing. I turned the recorder back on. Miss Laverne said every day we should ask ourselves, if the worst thing in the world happened, would I help protect someone else? Would I let myself be a harbor for someone who needs it? Then she said, I want each of you to say to the other, I will harbor you. I will harbor you. Somewhere in the house, my uncle was playing his guitar. Beneath it, I could hear the soft hum of the dishwasher. He strummed the same chords over and over, then moved up the frets and strummed something different. The music trembled through the house. I stared at the wall across from my bed. The only thing on it was a painting of a dark brown girl sitting at a piano, her back to me, her arms spread across the keys. There was something about the shape of her shoulders that made me think of Esteban, something both sad and proud at the same time. I pressed the cold metal of the recorder to my cheek and stared at the picture for a long time. One day, it too would be gone. The one time we took it down, there was a pale square beneath it, as though the sun had tanned the wall around the painting. And that, my uncle said about it, is all she wrote. Put the picture back, I had said to my uncle, turning away from it. Now, please. Calm down, Hales. My uncle gave me what's the big deal look. It's just a wall. But it was empty. And I didn't want to believe that was all was there. That when one thing went away, just the pale ghost of it remained. I want to believe in stories on top of stories. Always something else. Always one more ending. I put the recorder under my pillow. My hands were shaking. I knew Holly wouldn't have a problem with letting me record it, but I didn't know about the boys. One thing I wanted more than anything in the world was to hear what my mother sounded like. Was her voice high like mine? Did she have an accent, a lisp? I would never hear it again. Her voice was dust now, but if the others let me, I'd be able to keep a little part of us. I'd be able to keep this story forever. Chapter 9. The following Friday, we took our seats in the circle in the art room. Amari took out his sketch pad. Ashton and the other guys started flipping through comic books, and me and Holly talked to each other. It was warm in the classroom. The school had turned the heat on, and the tall radiators beneath the windows made soft hissing noises. We started peeling off our jackets and uniform sweaters. Even Esteban took off his Yankees jacket. Holly stood up and unbuttoned her school shirt. Underneath it, she was wearing a gold t-shirt with the words magic across the front. You still have to wear your uniform? Amari said. No, I don't. Not here. Holly folded her shirt and put it in her backpack and then sat back down again. Amari looked annoyed, like he wished he'd thought to wear a different shirt. You're going to get Miss Laverne in trouble. Teachers can't get in trouble, Holly said. They're like the god of school. Nah, the principal is the god, the teachers are the angels, Ashton said. I had a teacher who was more like the devil one, Tiago said. She was so mean you couldn't even crack a joke. She'd just, yell at you for not even doing anything bad. Miss Laverne never yells, Holly said. We all agreed. But geez, it's hot as the H word in here, Holly said. Amari said the H word. You can say it in here. Who wants to? Holly said, I got smarter words. Anybody can curse. Before Amari could get mad, I took out the voice recorder. Hey guys, can I ask you something? Speak, Red, Amari said. Holly's mom had cornrowed my hair into a bun on the top of my head. I thought it looked less red when it was in cornrows, but I guess Amari didn't think so. I explained to them about the recorder and played part of what I recorded the night before. It's like you're trying to remember us, Amari leaned back in his chair. We're right here, though, but I guess, in an hour we won't be. And maybe next week we won't even be in this room again. Like that kid that moved away who used to be in our class, remember him? Ashton added. He looked at me. We don't have his voice anymore. That dude never talked, Amari said. We never had his voice. If somebody asked me what he sounded like, I would be like, duh, you all remember his voice. The rest of us shook our heads. I remember his curly hair, I said, but that's not something you can listen to. Let me hear how I sound. I turned the recorder on, and Amari started trying to rap. My name is A, yeah, and that's okay, because around the way it's like, what's up, A? Esteban looked like he was on the verge of laughing. I played it back, and then all of us were laughing. Amari's voice sounded off, too slow for rapping, but too strange to be anything else. It just needs some music behind it, Amari said. You want me to sing? No, Holly said. Please don't add more hot air to this already hot room. And plus, that's not what Haley is asking us, right? I shrugged. I didn't think anything we said into the recorder was going to be wrong. It was all just part of us. I would have liked to hear what Amari sounded like when he sang. It's for stories, Holly said, grabbing the recorder from me, turning it on and speaking into it. It's for us getting remembered when we're not here anymore. It's for you not grabbing stuff out of people's hands, Amari said. Holly handed the recorder back to me and didn't say anything. Sometimes her hands and mouth worked faster than her brain and made her say and do things she didn't really mean to do, like grab stuff and say stuff. I don't mind, I said to Amari, pressing the stop button, because I didn't. Holly and I had been friends forever, and one thing about friends, they understood you. I like that it's from memory, Esteban crossed his legs. He looked like the Buddha sitting there. I held the recorder out to him, hopefully. You want to try? You just push this button. Then you can tell the world about your dad. You can tell them your whole story. I don't know if I want to do that. Esteban pushed the recorder back at me. My uncle says that when you tell your stories, it's like letting out all the scarab that's inside of you, I said. It's like you help stuff make sense. Esteban looked down at the jacket he had draped over his lap. Then he started touching it gently, like he was remembering something about it. It makes me too sad, he said. I don't know if my papi is cold or hot or hungry or scared right now. He took a deep breath. I don't know anything. Nobody in my family does. But what about the stuff you do know, E? Amari asked. If you talked about all the stuff you know and things you remember from before, Ashton added, would that make it not so bad? Esteban shrugged. ARTT, Amari said. A room to talk. We got you, E. Esteban reached out for the recorder. His nails were bitten so deep there was a ring of pale skin at the top of his fingers. It looked painful. After a minute, he curled his fingers over the recorder and took it from me. Okay, he said. I think I do want to talk. About him. About my papi. Chapter 10. We could ask you questions like in interviews, Holly said. Nah, that's dumb, Amari said. Interviewers don't do it like that anymore anyways. Yeah, they do, Holly glared at him. So who's dumb now? How else are they going to get people to talk? Amari leaned back and folded his arms and said in a deep voice, So, Esteban, tell me about your dad. Give me the good, the bad, and the ugly. Holly rolled her eyes. But before she could say anything else, Esteban started talking, and I touched her arm to shush her. We think they took my papi when he was coming home from work, Esteban said. He works in a factory in Queens, sealing video games in plastic. I don't know how he does it exactly, but he was going to show me. He promised me he was going to take me there one day, but he said it would have to be on a holiday because I couldn't miss school, and he doesn't work on the weekends. My papi said weekends are always for the weak family, and every day in school is a gift from God. He said that where he come from, I wouldn't be in school. I'd be working other people's lands or in a factory. Imagine, Papi said, a young boy like you with hands as hard as a man's, he said. Since me and my sister were born in this country, we were born with the American dream, like a silver spoon in our mouths. You're rich, he always told us. Not in money, because money isn't everything, but rich in dreams, because in this country you can be anything. Esteban put his head down on the desk. He thought he was done and was going to take the recorder back when Amari spoke. Now, Amari said, looking at Holly, to go deeper in the story, you're supposed to ask him a question. Then you ask him a question, Mr. Smarty Pants, Holly said. You're so up on the interview game. Go for it. See, Amari said. Why do I have to be the one to know everything? Yo, eat. Esteban lifts his head up. Yeah? Did your dad, I know he works in a factory, but if he could be anything in the world, what would it be, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with working in a factory. I know, Esteban said. He used to say he wanted to be a poet like Pablo Neruda. That guy wrote a whole bunch of love poems that my papi would read to the family. And another guy named Pedro Mir, he was from the Dominican Republic like us. My papi said Pedro's poems were like the poems he wanted to write. They were about regular people and working and stuff and like that. But you can't feed your family with a poem, my papi said. No se puede comprare un abrigo de invierno con un poema. Sorry if I said any of those wrong. Tiago laughed. I got you, he said. Oh man, that's like something my mom would say. You can't buy a winter coat with a poem. Esteban put his hands in his pocket and pulled them inside out how to show us the money. You can't get anything from writing poetry. My papi always says, I wrote poetry because of love. I stopped writing because of love too, because I love my family. Esteban got quiet again. In the hallway, some kids were dragging their sneakers across the floor and laughing about the squeaking around. Holly put her fingers in her ears as an adult voice said, where are you supposed to be right now? The squeaking stopped and Esteban started talking again. But my papi had another dream too. If you ever went to the park by the bridge on Sundays, you might have seen it. He could hit a baseball out of that park like nobody else. Everybody says so. They said, how can such a little man have so much power in his swing? But he just pulls the bat out and wham! The ball goes flying and the guy in the outfield doesn't even run or lift their gloves in the air because they know that ball is gone. It keeps going and going like it wants to try to meet God. And then everybody starts cheering and jumping around Papi and telling him that he should be playing for the Yankees and pulling down the major dinero because, man, even A-Rod, who probably makes $1 million, can't hit a ball like that. But my Papi would just laugh. He said, if you go to the Dominican Republic, you can find 20 more like him in the same park. He says, like Pele, they don't even have balls to play with, but they can hit rocks and cans and even once an old broken shoe. Gone. When he comes back, I want to see that, Amari, I said. I need him to teach me. Esteban almost smiled, then he didn't. But what if he doesn't come back? He said. At night when I'm dreaming, I dream that the Yankees recruited him and that's where he is. But then it's morning time and my mind is not dreaming so much anymore. And the day is just like the day it was before, a day without my papi in it. And our apartment feels darker and more quiet. My little sister doesn't even cry when mommy tells her she can't watch television. She just climbs into mommy's lap and puts her thumb in her mouth. He's coming back, Tiago said. I bet they're going to be a happy ending, Esteban, I said. I bet he comes home and everything ends up fine. Yeah, Ashton said. I bet by the time it's baseball weather, all of us are going to be sitting on the bleachers watching your dad hit that ball out of the park. He swung his arms back like he was batting and shielded his eyes. There it goes. There, it's gone. Esteban turned off the recorder and whispered, Mommy thinks that maybe they sent him back to the DR. None of us said anything. We didn't have to. We knew who the they people were. We knew what Esteban was afraid of. We knew why he turned off the recorder. Mommy says that if they sent him back, then even though we came here for the dream of America, we're going to have to go back too, because without Papi, we're not a whole family. We're just like pieces of family, like my little sister's wooden puzzle, the one that's supposed to be 4 puppies, but it's only 3.5 puppies now because the corner part, that's the last puppy's neck and face and ears, that piece is gone. Papi is like the neck, face, and ears of our family. When they took him, they took a little piece of all of us. When Esteban handed me the recorder, I put it in my backpack. Then, without even thinking about it, I got back up and hugged him. It was a quick hug, but in that minute, I inhaled deep, and he smelled like soap and cinnamon candy. I wanted to remember him, everything. I wanted to tell him that if he had to go away, I'd remember all the little things about him, but I didn't. I went back to my desk and stared down at my shoes. Amari coughed the word, crush, and everyone except me laughed. Do you think it recorded the whole story? Esteban asked, except for the part I didn't want to say in it. I nodded. It's digital. It has a ton of memory. You can transfer the files to a computer and upload and stuff like that. I realized how fast I was talking and stopped, because now there was a sadness in the room like a thick gray ghost at my shoulder. I had been talking fast to cover it with my words, sent it hurling through the window, but I couldn't. I tried to imagine the ghost surrounded with sunlight and baseball games and poetry, good stuff that would push the ghost away. When you talk, Esteban, Holly said, it's like I can see everything you say. Your words draw pictures for me. I know that sounds crazy, but they do. Esteban smiled. That's what Papi says, too. He says poems are tiny pictures. I just hope you don't have to move away, Amari said. It would just really suck. Both Tiago and Ashton said, yeah, it would. Esteban looked around at us like he was seeing us for the first time. His smile dipped down, then up again, then faded. I know, he said, but I want to be where my Papi is. I want us to be a family again.